Avoid prototype pitfalls. Are you making these mistakes? Hi, everyone. My name is Tessa, Director of Marketing at IdeaPros, and I have Rusty Allen with me. Hi, Rusty.
Hi.
Rusty is a VP of Design and Engineering at IdeaPros, and today we're talking all about prototypes. Specifically, we're going to cover some pitfalls and how you can avoid problems with the prototyping process. So, Rusty, before we dive in to that, can you give us just a little bit of a background about why we need prototypes so much?
Well, ultimately it's a bridge between sketching and creating computer-aided design, which is just building the idea in the computer. Prior to pulling the trigger on production, which will be 1,000 up to 100,000 of something, that's production. You want to make sure that what you're producing is right. So that's the big idea there is prototyping is a bridge between the idea and production just to validate your assumptions.
Right. And you don't want to end up with, not manufacturing a whole bunch of something that doesn't work. Right. So exactly. The big picture value is that you really get to see what changes need to be made early.
Yep, exactly.
And make those tweaks. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong when you're trying to go from a computer-aided design or a CAD drawing over to the actual product, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I can show a quick example of one that just happened this week.
Yes. Yes.
So this is a product that it's a tool that allows you. It's one of the IdeaPros partners, Mantis. If you guys are watching, hello. But so we prototyped this product. It allows you to pop baseboards out of the.
Right.
You can pop baseboards out when you're kind of flooring a house or something very quickly without needing to use like a crowbar, right? And so theoretically, this would work, but you don't know, and you don't want to buy or produce 10,000 of these until you know it works.
Right.
So we go and produce a prototype just to go and test it. So we actually produced this, and we sent them a prototype out of the real materials. Now they're going to go back and test this with some floors, right? So the other side of it, and we obviously want to make sure this angle is correct. It's kind of hard to see because it's a big part. The angles, we also want to make sure that it's strong enough to pop those baseboards out. And this was a part that was 3D printed to test the handle, right? So
the actual base of it is metal. So you've got more real materials as opposed to a 3D printed plastic.
Exactly. I mean, you want to make sure that as many of the parts as we can produce out of the realistic parts as possible, just because you want to test it as close to the real world experience as possible. And so, for instance, this grip, this was designed and 3D printed.
So cool.
It's not going to be made out of rubber because I don't have rubber material here. There are 3D printers that do that, but this gets the point across to see, is it strong enough? Is this curve actually fit your hand clean and everything that's going on, right? But I'll show you an example of how, the purpose of doing it as well. So if you see like the graphics on the side of this, Mantis is built in, and the logos on the back. The problem is, I messed up, and I made the square, which is going to attach to the post here. I had it at a wrong angle, right?
Oh.
So if you see,
that's so important.
It doesn't line up.
It only goes one way.
So that just happens, and so thankfully we didn't make 25,000 of these that are they're wrong, because I would look like an idiot. So and the partner would not be happy, right? So
but there's no way to know all the elements when you're first doing this CAD design, right? So you have to touch, feel, maneuver an
Right.
item to really see. And you have some things that you specifically go through too, that you're looking at, the human element, technology element. And we'll get into that in just a second, but go ahead and tell us if there were any other things you wanted to mention on that prototype.
Yeah, I mean, there's really just, it's ergonomics. You want to make sure, is it comfortable in your hand? I mean, if you've seen a CAD design where you can rotate it in the computer, it's really hard to get real world proportions of that, because it's just this object on a computer, right? And this is just rotating around. You have to actually touch it and feel it, see if the grip actually works, and make sure that it's aligned properly, and like all these details. And you really want to see a physical unit before you do that. There's also the element of making sure that parts fit together properly. You're somewhat limited 3D printing of what you can do, and how you can test real world, like say snap fits, for example, like like the door that goes onto a battery box or something like that, right? I mean, obviously you won't get that exact snap that you'll get in production, but you'll get a pretty good idea. And then, it's really comes down to the expertise of people that have been through it long enough to know that how it's going to react in the real world, or with real world manufacturing techniques. So, you're still going to have little things in production that are not perfect. That's just the way it is. But, as long as you produce, I can get into the weeds about it, but as long as you produce fail safes, you can eliminate some of the problems,
Right, but that's the benefit. So normally, in a normal situation, you as the entrepreneur, Kelly or Daryl or Karen, any of the people that are watching us that have products, they're going to go to get a prototype done, and they're going to tell people what they want, and they're going to give this prototype. So I think what's so beneficial about the IdeaPros team is that they have experienced these things firsthand, and they know to say, oh, we haven't looked at this or this. And it's a combined brain trust of people that can identify potential problems beforehand. I mean, the prototype companies obviously have some of these, but they're going to do what you say to produce.
Exactly.
The CAD person as well is going to design what you say to design. So
Right.
a lot goes into the product and the design before it even gets to this phase. And then even during this phase, it's being able to identify those potential problems. So the biggest pitfall actually is that people don't make prototypes. That was one of the biggest ones that we talked about, right, Rusty?
Yep.
They didn't make a prototype, and they go straight to manufacturing. Obviously could have major problems, just like what you had noticed. And obviously 1,000 units or 10,000 units sitting around your home is bad. So the other thing that they make a mistake of is, so we had a couple of them. They're not taking into consideration the ergonomics, which you mentioned. So the human element, and then what other things might they, mistakes might they make throughout this process?
Well, it's really, the fitment, making sure that, sometimes whenever you're producing anything, you have custom parts, and you have sourced parts, right? And so, for an example, this is not a plug, but this is a product that I launched a while back called Gobi, right? This just happened to be sitting on my desk, but obviously we're not producing a custom O-ring, right? O-rings just exist, and we want to make sure before going into production that we've used the right O-ring, right? And so now you have an O-ring that we know we're going to buy thousands of these, but we need to make sure that it's going to fit properly, because there's a slight stretch to this O-ring. It's not perfect. And so we need to make sure that it's going to line up. So again, if we go and buy, we go into production with this, and we've committed to using this O-ring, and we buy 25,000 O-rings and make 25,000 bottles. If it comes in and it's not to spec, then now we're going to have O-rings that don't work, because say it's sagging or something, and it's not creating a tight seal.
Fit is what you call it.
Yeah,
making sure that everything fits together and works
exactly.
well.
Making sure that everything fits together. There's enough clearance in there. I mean, whenever you're injection molding things or blow molding things, they have shrinkage issues with the different materials shrink at a different capacity, and in tooling, whenever you're mass producing something, they take that into account. So there's other details that go into actually merging it into production, but that's just a really simple example. Another one might be, again, it's just random things on my desk here, but a pair of sunglasses.
I love your desk, Russ. You have so many fun things here.
Yeah. So say a pair of sunglasses, same sort of thing. I mean, we need to make sure that it's going to actually fit your face. We have to make sure that they're going to be comfortable, and the hinges that were theoretically in the computer, the way that it works, we need to make sure that it's going to somewhat work prior to going into production.
Right.
The biggest pitfall, though, and I can get into some of the details on manufacturing.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just really don't know how things are going to react. So what ends up happening is it's not uncommon to spend over $100,000 on, and sometimes it's a lot less, but just imagine you spend $100,000 on tooling. They'll go in prior to mass manufacturing this, and they will, take a piece of steel and they cut out the interior part where the injection molding plastic is going to go in, right? If it comes back, and we're kind of curious about how it's going to fit together, if it comes back and it's incorrect, we can still go back to that steel tool and we can shave off some steel to make it work. So a lot of the times it's called steel safe. So it means that we know that we don't know exactly how it's going to react, but we're erring on the side of being able to take steel away versus adding steel. I know I'm kind of getting in the weeds there, but
it's really interesting.
That's a point it's a big one, because it's like you want to, like cutting your hair or something, you don't want to cut too much off.
Yeah, you can't go back once you've done that.
Can't go back, yeah. So the way that they do that in production is they actually go back and they will weld inside of that joint if you need to add material. So they have to go in, they have to weld steel or material back onto that and then shave it off. And then it doesn't actually hold up as long because it's not steel, it's a welded piece. And so it just creates complications down the line. So like you said, the biggest pitfall is just not creating a prototype, because you can't. You gotta do it. It's just, and I have a 3D printer right here. I
know my dad has a couple.
It's not that complicated of a thing to do. So it's just very obvious that that's a must.
Well, and you mentioned when we were talking beforehand, because I'm new to prototypes. So guys, I guess I'm going to ask vicariously for you guys. But there are 4 elements that go into that are taken into consideration when you're going to be prototyping. Do you want to go over those?
Well, it's really just producing anything. It's not necessarily
true,
but it's material, color, texture, and form. Like those are the only things that make up any object. And so as many of those things as you can test as close to production as possible, that's the goal. So,
right.
So, and then the human factor element comes into it, obviously. But in terms of just the part, like the fact that this is not rubber and this is 3D printed, at the end of the day, isn't that big of a deal, right? I mean, we can still test what we need to test in this material, and it doesn't have to be exactly rubber that's going to be used, right? We can get a general idea of how it's going to work.
Great.
Which isn't always the case.
Well, true.
If you're prototyping, an O-ring and you're making that out of hard plastic, it's not O-ring. The same thing, right? So it's kind of a case-by-case basis, but you're trying to learn as much as you're trying to fail fast. That's the goal.
Exactly.
You're trying to fail early, but so you don't fail when it's going to cost a lot of money.
Perfect. Well, I know we have a couple people that have questions. If you guys, we're going to come back and answer questions in just one minute. So if you do have a question, throw it into the chat. Also, if you're new to the prototyping process, you don't know how it works and you want to go in deeper and know more, then hashtag prototype, and I will get you guys. We have a lot of really good shows about the whole prototyping process, and it goes through all of the phases. We can help define that a little bit more for you guys. But right now we have one question. What if someone doesn't have the experience to create a prototype? When would they hire someone? That's a good question.
Well, I mean, that's if you're a partner at IdeaPros, it's part of the process.
Right. Some of our fans are not yet IdeaPros partners, but I think that there is a process and definitely I'll get you guys the whole prototyping back end.
Well, the prototype comes after the design process, right? Like for instance, for this example, the partner, worked on this and had some real world experiences and used something similar, and they sort of figured out the angle, right? And a couple details. When it came to building this, obviously it has to be designed out. And you have to design it first, right? You have to start with something that, in theory, makes a lot of sense material-wise and all that. To answer your question, the prototyping process comes after, research and design and a lot of details that need to be figured out in terms of the theory of it. So it comes it comes right prior to production.
Right. And one of the things, well, first of all, somebody had said that the prototype looks great and that it was good that you were able to catch that error on Mantis.
Exactly.
So that's cool.
Yeah, I know. It's almost better for me than anyone, so I don't look like a fool.
But, it's people knowing that those things, to catch those, because I definitely know that made, the normal process, it wouldn't have been easy to identify that. You just know what to look for. And
it's just like catching a spelling error, everyone's made the mistake. And it's part of the process. It's better to catch it early.
Right. Perfect. So what I do think we have, like I said, several videos about the whole process that leads up to, and but the end of the prototyping, what it actually amounts to, and Rusty, kind of tell me exactly what this is because I don't know the words for it, but it's actually the specs from the manufacturer on how much it's going to cost to produce. Is that one of the things that comes from a prototype, ultimately to being able to identify how much it's going to also cost you? Yeah.
I mean, well, in theory, the idea is that in a perfect world, your product has the least amount of parts possible, right? And the least amount of parts equals the least amount of fail points. It equals the least amount of cost. There's just less stuff going on. Less stuff can break. Less stuff needs to be created, right? And so sometimes in the prototyping process, we're like, well, hey, how about if, I wonder if we can get away with eliminating this part by designing it this way. And sometimes that works out. And you can really only, bob and weave through it and come up with these ideas and try to prove the theory through a prototype, because you can't really do it in production because that's a much bigger endeavor, right? Well, I'll show you another
examples.
Just random stuff. My dog's wall here, right? So this is a product. I'm sure everybody's seen one of these that allows you to throw a ball with this guy, right? It's just like a hands-free ball thrower. These guys are genius for making this thing. It makes you actually throw the ball a lot further, and you don't get slime all over your hands, right? Super cool. It's one part, right?
Right.
Well, I'm sure that this wasn't just for look and feel. See these curves and everything. There's a method to that. I mean, maybe it's so you can grab it and it doesn't grab it. It holds
you have to be able to get the ball back out.
Yeah, or maybe it allows it on the ground to pop into it, right? pop into the ball. I guarantee you these guys prototyped a ton of versions before they came out with this version, right?
Right.
And you wouldn't do this in production. You wouldn't trial and error and fail in production because it's way too expensive. It's just not the way it works, right? So they wanted to make sure that what's cool is it's one part. Is it comfortable? Like, can I actually grip this thing? Does it have these grips here are built into this single part? So you want to be able to grab it really well. Right here, you know, they wanted to take away some material. So the more material you take away, the less expensive it's going to be.
And maybe weight and shipping costs are less. Exactly. I mean, it could be all kinds of things.
All kinds of things. And does it still work? You know, by taking these things away, is it still bendable? Can it still do its job? This is a prime example of a 3D printed thing that you are engineering that you can really only prove through prototyping.
There's I know that there's another element that we didn't talk about, and that's when technology is involved in the prototype, but it is something you have to take into consideration, right? So if technology is also involved, it is even more complex, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, well, you can only prototype to an extent. I mean, that kind of gets to more of what's called a proof of concept when you're dealing with technology and boards and Bluetooth and apps and things like that. You know, and there's also somewhat of limitations. I mean, I had to show this, show this to a partner recently. This is a blow molded bottle, right? Mm-hmm. This is a squeezable blow molded bottle. Well, it's kind of difficult to prototype this in the real world materials because this just isn't the way 3D printing works, right? Well, I mean, you can theoretically, you can get away with it. It may not be the most beautiful thing you've ever seen, but it'll kind of prove it. Again, like it's not completely fail safe, but it'll get you pretty far. And you know, some of the stuff just needs to be figured out in manufacturing, but.
Right. And you mentioned that, you just said that too, a proof. So one of the reasons that people might need a prototype is a proof of concept, right? So being able to go to, say, investors or to get additional money or to take on different phases, not necessarily move straight to manufacturing, right? Exactly.
Well, the other thing, yeah, that's a really good point because the leap from prototype, well, to go from idea to prototype is a lot of investment of time and trial and error and failing fast. The leap from prototype to production is much more expensive because you have to pay for tooling, you have to do all this stuff. But you can have something in your hand that you can go show an investor and say, hey, you know, we've failed all these times and we came up with something that works, right? And now we're really excited about it. And now all we need is X amount of money to go into production. But you can show this unique discovery that you've created and you know that it's going to work. So then you can actually go get a provisional patent as well, which is a really important thing to do.
Right. So, but if anyone's been on Fred's shows, they know how Fred is about the patents, and you have to understand. You have to know what the end product is going to look like mostly before you patent, so that you're not patenting the wrong thing. So, you know, you're going to have to do it over if you didn't get the one that's close enough to the actual manufacturable end result. So
you can do a continuation in part as well, but that's another video.
But that's true. That's true. And you've dealt with a lot of that before. So I thank you so much. I know we only have a couple minutes left here, and I want to say hi to everyone. So thank you so much, Rusty. We appreciate you being on here. And I think the biggest thing is that don't try to do it alone, right? I mean, that's the big picture. I mean, this is a process that you want to get the experts there for you. Obviously, IdeaPros does that. But if you guys have questions, we want to help you answer them. So again, #prototype if you guys want more information about the whole prototyping process. We have tons of free resources on our website, on the blog at ideapros.com/blog, as well as Facebook and YouTube videos. So I am going to just say thank thank you so much, Odin, Jason, Vanessa, Donna. I see you guys. Jared, thank you. Jay, even our web designer over there with us. Corey, I know we see, is it Michael P. Ryan over there on Recite? Thank you guys all. Steve Brown. If I didn't say your name, it's just because I'm going down this long list of people here, and I'm glad you all are here, even over on YouTube. We're here every Friday at noon Pacific time, so we'll see you guys next week. Don't forget to click to get reminders after on Facebook. It's just click the reminder bell or subscribe on YouTube to the channel, and we'll keep you guys posted. So we'll see you guys all next week.
Cool. All right.
Thanks.
See you guys.
Bye.